Norfolk Southern would begin to give their Heritage fleet new coats of paint. And 8104 will eventually be because of criticism.
Okay, radio. Hurry this thing out. How many videos are
If you've
there?
been thinking about going back to school in 2026, but the cost feels impossible, UMGC might be able to help.
Oh my God, there are 25. Captain's on. 2 times speed.
Number 2 record rebuilds from the Union Pacific, each have their own qualities. But there's one record rebuild that has something, well, interesting. 6759 was built at General Electric's Erie shops in March 1996 as one of multiple new AC-44s bought by the Union Pacific. The AC-44s were the step up compared to the Dash 9, as they were fitted with new AC traction motors, but still had the same horsepower as the Dash 9s. But back to our locomotive. 6759's life, as per normal with the series, was rather uneventful until December 17, 2007. 6759 was in charge of a Red Rock coal train when it collided with the Union Pacific local, taking the impacts of multiple cars and the conductor's side being ripped open. Thankfully, though, the crew survived despite the severe accident. In 2008, 6759 would move to the Coast Engine and Equipment Company to be repaired. However, instead of receiving a regular wide cab, a cab was reused from a Canadian National Dash 9, this one being number 2584, which was caught in a washout around Rocky Ford, Alberta, and thankfully, the cab was spared. 6759 would emerge from the Seaco not long after, with its rather unique cab. CS-9s were fitted with what's called teardrop cabs, as evident with the dips in the cab windows. Must have been ratioed by other railroads. When the cab was fitted, the teardrop windows were, oddly enough, removed, but the dips in the cab were still present. Aside from that oddity, 6759's career still continues on as normal, as one of the few unique locomotives on Union Pacific. However, with the rise of rebuilds, 6759's cab will likely get replaced with a Jeepo cab once it's time for the rebuild. So, who knows how long she'll be in this form?
Okay, let's skip that.
If you were to go to the east side of Chicago, you would be met with plenty of industry outside of the Windy City. Located between Blue Island and the Indiana border lies a welding business, with a railroad interchange with the South Shore Line. However, what works in the area is a rare survivor from a bygone era. EMD introduced the SW8 in 1950, which was during the time when EMD's yard switchers were selling like hotcakes. The SW8s had 800 horsepower with an 8-cylinder 567B engine, which was more powerful than any early
Wait, over here?
EMD introduced the SW8 in 1950, which was during the time when EMD's yard switch...
This is me. So this is me making a popular short, remaking a popular short. Now this over here, pretend this isn't a popular short, and then like out of nowhere, like 1 million or so, 2,000 or so people like come to watch my video instead of crappy videos.
Switchers were selling like hotcakes. The SW8s had 800 horsepower with an 8-cylinder 567B engine, which was more powerful than any early designs that EMD made. However, it was less horsepower compared to the EMD SW7s. 300 units were produced in total, with the Lehigh Valley taking on 29 units for their roster, and being nicknamed the Pups. How sweet. 273 is our unit of focus today, which was built in September 1951, and like its sisters, will be put to use switching out various freight cars in the Lehigh Valley network. It would continue working into the days of Conrail, and surprisingly, it still wore its livery up until 1979, when it was renumbered to 8687, and eventually receiving the iconic Conrail blue livery. Where the fuck's Colin? Numbered to 8687, and eventually receiving the iconic. Where the fuck's Colin? And eventually receiving the iconic Conrail blue livery. Conrail would also rebuild the locomotives and convert them into SW8Ns, which would result in the removed side cooling grates and leaving the iconic hump on the hood. However, its service life would be short on Conrail, as around that time, the railroad was already starting to retire predecessor locomotives in the 1980s, the A6A7 being a part of these retirements. The exact year that she was retired during is unknown, but it was likely around the mid-1980s or before. After her retirement, the locomotive would go under the radar for many years until the early 2000s, when a couple of rail fans would spot the locomotive at the Maryland Pig Iron of Illinois. It was confirmed later that the unit would operate for the iron facility, picking up interchange gondolas from the South Shore Line and bringing them to be loaded on weekdays. The unit has been renumbered to 780, but it's still carrying its original Conrail blue, the single chime horn, and even showing its Lehigh Valley roots within all that rust. And yet, it still operates to this day. It's not the only surviving Lehigh Valley SW8 though, as the Reading Blue Mountain Northern has 3 SW8s in service, and there are likely a few others surviving in industrial use, but really who knows. All that we know that is 86A7 is the prime example of a surviving Lehigh Valley SW8, and it's quite surprising really that a simple blue switcher at 72 years old is still kicking in industrial service as a sign of a bygone era.
Switch to TurboTax and file your own taxes free in the app if you didn't file with us last year. Just file with TurboTax Do It Yourself by February 28th. Download now.
The Southern Railroad steam locomotives were rather varied, from the iconic Pacifics to the Malays with rather funny whistles. A few steam locomotives from the 1910s were part of a unusual to the Malays with rather funny whistles. A few steam locomotives from these funny whistles. From the iconic Pacifics to the Malays with rather funny whistles. A few steam locomotives from the 19th were part of a rather uncanny experiment.
Wow.
In 1915, the Southern Railroad decided to experiment with the idea of tractor locomotives and implement them on the steep hills near Asheville, North Carolina. The idea was similar to the Erie triplexes, as a set of rear wheels would be placed underneath the tender compared to the standard pairs of bogies, essentially just making them a lighter version of the triplex. The Southern would not build new locomotives from the ground up, and instead would rebuild a few existing locomotives, which included 5 282s with 280 sets, another Mikado which had a 260 set, and a 210-2 was also part of the rebuild program. This would total into 7 locomotives, with an additional wheel set from 7 other locomotives. However, like the triplexes, this experiment did not produce good results. Whenever the coal and water level ran low, the traction would decrease, meaning less pulling power for a train, and to top it off, with the additional set of wheels, the steaming capacity for the boiler wasn't enough to supply another set of cylinders, making it a pain in the ass for locomotive crews to deal with. In the end, the concept was dropped in favor of booster trucks, and all locomotives were converted back to having regular tenders, and they continued serving with the Southern until the end of steam, with none of the 7 locomotives surviving into preservation. So, the tender tractor experiment was a rather unusual and yet awkward rebuild program that, like the triplexes, was nothing more than a failure. And it wasn't just the Southern that tried this method, as the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway also tried the tractor method, to similar results. All of these were results of a failed experiment only to ending in disaster. And from that point onwards, these types of locomotives wouldn't be tried again in the steam era.
Meat Factor. It's protein without questions. No cutting corners. Just fresh, chef-crafted meals with up to 50 grams of protein.
Via Rail's modern roster is rather simple. P-42s, F-40s, and more recently, Chargers. However, 4 locomotives hide within the outskirts of Montreal, working behind the scenes of our favorite Canadian rail company. The SW-1000s were introduced by EMD in 1966 as a successor to the SW-900s, with a modern car body and the inclusion of the new 645 prime mover. Despite being an older model, they didn't sell well, with only 119 being built, which was 252 less compared to the locomotives they succeeded. Rather ironic, really. Inland Steel would be one of these buyers, purchasing 4 units in total, numbered 115 to 118. The 4 switchers would spend 20 years operating at the steel plant in East Chicago, Indiana, up until 1987, when the 4 switchers would be sold to Via Rail for switching duties at their major yards. The units would be repainted before being shipped to Via, with 202 and 204 being distinct for carrying a blue stripe along the hood, mimicking the F-40s in some way, while 201 and 203 were just simply gray and yellow. The units would often be shuffled between Toronto and Montreal to perform switching duties, but as of recent years, however, they've mostly just been stuck in Montreal. As of today, only 202 and 204 survived, while 201 and 203 were sold off in the mid-1990s. While most of the fleet was sold off or stripped for parts, the one remaining switcher still does what it was repurposed for, that being maneuvering locomotives and cars around Via's maintenance center in Montreal, making sure they're in top condition before their next runs. Pretty interesting to say the least. Whenever a merger happens between 2 railroad companies, all the assets from the other railroad would transfer over to the merging railroad and often repainted into the corporate colors. One of the more recent mergers was the creation of CPKC, of which CP's roster still had remnants of leftover fallen flag locomotives from past mergers. Of these was the GP40 still wearing its original colors after 3 mergers. 2010 was built in October 1966 as one of 72 GP40s built for the Milwaukee Road. The road would classify their units as 30-ERS-4s, and soon were put to work on the road's freight trains. However, following the Milwaukee Road's merger of the Soo Line in 1986, the locomotive would soon be patched over with its number still intact. These units would be nicknamed Bandits, due to how the Soo Line tried to patch out the Milwaukee Road identification, which came out with a rather interesting result. As the years went on, the fleet of Bandits would slowly be sold off to other railroads, or eventually repainted in Canadian Pacific colors. But as for 2010, the unit would be untouched into the days of Canadian Pacific, where it was still working in Wisconsin primarily on local trains. However, around 2016, most of Canadian Pacific's older EMDs would slowly be sold off and stored away as a result of Hunter Harris's implementation of precision scheduled railroading. The locomotive would be moved off to Minneapolis for storage for many years, and more recently was moved to St. Paul for storage. However, the Bandit hasn't seen revenue service for over 8 years. Given the fact that most of the older EMDs have been sold off in recent years, we can assume this locomotive will be sold off soon, putting an end to this locomotive's career. Lasting 67 years in service, surviving 3 mergers, and still keeping its original livery, albeit patched up, this little Bandit served a rather lively career, and serves as a representation of a bygone era of North American railroading.
If I were him, I'd bundle my home and auto and pick up the real victory. Savings.
Are you talking
Like
about bowling?
No, bundle. Bundle. Bundle and save with the personal price plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm.
Ever since their formation in 1971, Amtrak has been improving and expanding its roster of locomotives. But where exactly did they start? During Amtrak's humble beginnings, the trains were nothing more than mismatched equipment from various roads, resulting in various colorful consists anywhere you go. Because of this era of Amtrak would be dubbed as the Rainbow Era. Obviously, this wouldn't do, as Amtrak need to have their own corporate identity instead of, well, all this. The first unit to receive any resemblance of a corporate identity was none other than E8 4316, one of many hand-me-down E-units that were absorbed by Amtrak. This cab unit was first built in October 1952 for the Pennsylvania Railroad as E8A number 5716. The Pennsylvania would assign their E-units to the most top-line passenger trains, like the Broadway Limited or the General, alongside various intercity duties across the Pennsylvania network. 5716 had a regular life and was later absorbed by the ill-fated and disastrous Penn Central, being renumbered to 4316 and gained the Penn Central's most iconic livery of black. This would remain unchanged until the fall of 1971, when it was outchopped in Amtrak's first official livery. While sporting the Rodney Black, it had blue and white stripes on the front, which would lead along the side to where the pointless arrow would be, Amtrak's first corporate logo. Being the first locomotive painted under Amtrak, the engine was given the nickname Day One, although the name itself is a bit ironic, as it was outchopped only in the fall of 1971, just months after Amtrak started operations. This livery was only short-lived, as by 1972, the unit was outchopped in what was known as Phase 1, Amtrak's first official paint scheme, and which would become the standard livery for new units. Aside from a couple renumbers in 1973 and 1977, the E-unit would serve on many of Amtrak's Northeastern services, following its Pennsylvania roots for a good few years. But with the more modern and reliable F40s arriving on intercity services, and the E-units being past their service lives, 4316, alongside the other E-units, would be retired by the end of 1978, and 4316 wouldn't see the light of preservation. However, its legacy was not forgotten, as in 2021, to celebrate 50 years of operation, Amtrak painted up one of their new Chargers, number 301, in the exact scheme as 4316 did back in 1971. You can still find 301 in operation on Amtrak's long-distance trains today, carrying on the legacy of Amtrak's first paint scheme. While 4316 is no longer with us, it is an important locomotive in Amtrak's history, as it opened the door for many new paint schemes to come, and decades worth of newer locomotives to keep America's passenger trains running throughout the 53 years of Amtrak's existence. And it's that reason alone that 4316 will always be a vital and significant part of the history of Amtrak. All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak! All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak! So much comfort, so much to see. Travel the way travel should be. Superliners, come see what we've done. They can get there. Part of the fun. All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak. All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak. Same old flights, same old planes. We'll have you seeing our brand new trains. All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak. All aboard, all aboard, all aboard Amtrak.
Man, that was awesome. Now, 5 left. Oh.
Pacific experimented with running a coal-powered turbine, the results weren't satisfactory, resulting in the idea of coal-powered diesels being forgotten to time. At least until this company stepped in. During the early 1980s, General Electric was upgrading their technology for the next new locomotives. In March 1983, GE would build a new testbed with 3,600 horsepower and a 16-cylinder engine. It felt like the perfect successor to the Dash 7s, which at the time were dwindling in sales. GE wanted to perfect the new technology to keep their status as the top loco builder for America. So this new locomotive had to be a massive improvement from the last generation. The lone C36-H, number 607, would be trialed at Conrail, Norfolk Southern during 1983. With the results, the railroads would get the more similar C72-8s and C39-8s during 1984.
Okay.
As for the C36, while it was offered in GE's catalog, no railroads placed orders for the model, and with nothing else to do with the locomotive, the lone demonstrator would languish at GE's Erie plant, and often made appearances on the test bed alongside other demo units. With the 90s swinging in, GE would partner with Norfolk Southern and the Department of Energy to produce a coal-fueled locomotive, with 607, now renumbered 609, being converted to run on what's called coal slurry, which is a combination of coal dust and water. It was thought that the diesel would run between various coal plants in Pennsylvania, with the diesel being refueled with the coal slurry whenever low. In theory, it's an interesting concept, but the experiment never went anywhere, as it proved to be inefficient for operations, and railroads chose that they would be better off using regular fuel instead. Half of these thinks that there would have been similar problems to that of the coal turbine that UP had. As a result, the coal-fueled diesel project was dropped shortly thereafter. As for 609, it would be kept at the Erie plant and later rebuilt in 1999 to Dash 9 specs. This makeover would see 609 renumbered again to 899, receiving new electronics and a large hood to boot. I hate it. Aside from being briefly leased to boot. Aside from being briefly leased to NS in the early 2000s, 899 has spent its life at the Erie plant, but as of recent years, has more or less been sitting in storage with its future being undetermined. We can all agree it's an unusual career for this test bed. I mean, from being trialed on railroads to running on coal dust, to being converted to a Dash 9, 899, or 609, or 607 was a rather interesting anomaly from General Electric. And while it may not have seen mass production like its predecessors and later successors, its innovations have led to more successful models in GE's history. So I guess it's something to embrace, I suppose. Although I still think that long would nobody think.
Booking.com has all kinds of stays, because a city hotel is right for some, but not quite right for others.
In recent times, we've had locomotives receiving unofficial paint jobs that contradict the status quo. I mean, look what's happening with CSX and NS right now. In this case, we're going deep into the storage lines on the Union Pacific to a short-lived internet sensation. Deep in the deserts of Utah lied a massive deadline of stored Union Pacific locomotives, all victims of decreased traffic and precision scheduled railroading. In front of the deadline is SC60M 2519, originally built as 6364 in October 1992, and later renumbered to 2519 in 2006. 2519, alongside other SC60s, were used nationwide on various freight trains across the UP system, before being thrown into storage in 2015 when many were being sidelined from regular service. 2519 would end up in a storage line in Lund, Utah, being placed at the front of the many outdated and unreliable locomotives, including some sister units like SC60M 2472. The lead locomotive would be the victim of a group of graffiti artists as the team painted the entire engine in the dead of night into, well, a tiger. fancy tiger stripes down to the frame, eyes on the front windows, to a giant gaping mouth covering the front of the nose. This was a very impressive piece of graffiti, and I'm surprised that they managed to do the whole damn engine. The Rail Beast would become a talking point on social media throughout that week, gathering quite some buzz across different social media platforms, for better or for worse. But saying this, it wasn't long until UP caught wind of it, because just a week after the massive makeover, the locomotive was taken out of the storage line and moved all the way down to Jenks for a full repaint. 2519 would later be outshopped in a fresh new coat of UP paint, but this didn't mean anything because the locomotive was then returned back to storage and hasn't moved since. This incident was quite a unique stance, given that UP locomotives are subject to the vandalism in certain parts of the network, yet the company doesn't really do much. I guess the situation was different enough since UP refused to comment on the video, but officials from Operation Lifesaver say otherwise, stating, "Railroad trespassing laws are in place to protect the private property of rail companies and keep citizens safe. Vandalism, rail seeking, surfer graffiti, railroad equipment, just for the sake of wanting likes, is something I don't. But whatever, fine."
Can I stop? Yeah. I'm almost, okay? Just 3 more. I am.
GE's Evolution series have been the backbone for North American railroading in the 21st century, with these modern machines being at the head end of almost every freight train in the continent. However, amongst thousands in the clone army, one of these GEVOs has spent its whole life in, of all places, a cement plant. CEMEX is a multinational cement company based out of Mexico, with many operations across 4 continents, with North America being one of them. Of the many plants owned by the company, one of them is located in New Braunfels, Texas. The operations are what you expect from an industrial railroad, with Union Pacific handling the shipments of cement, where it's transferred on the ships to be transported around the world and put to use on various construction sites. But we're not here to talk about the operations now. In March of 2008, CEMEX would purchase a new locomotive from General Electric. The singular locomotive will be built at GE's Erie plant in the form of ES44AC number 81. The lone GEVO was pretty standard in terms of performance, but seems to be built down to Canadian Pacific specifications with lower number boards and riding on steerable trucks. Its livery was pretty basic, a white plain paint job and yellow handrail highlights, so nothing to write home about for this one, unfortunately. 81 would be shipped from the Erie plant down to its new home in New Braunfels at the CEMEX plant. And since then, the lone GEVO has spent its service life marshalling cement hoppers across the plant, and gaining quite the filthy appearance due to the rather gritty environment it worked in. However, it seems as of more recent times, the locomotive hasn't really been seen by the public eye. But apparently, it's still located at the same...
Did I just hear Penn's voice or somewhat? I think I heard Penn's voice from BFDI. Oh my god.
Hasn't really been seen by the public eye. But apparently, it's still located at the same plant today, so we can conclude the locomotive is still in revenue service with CEMEX. To think that the last place you'd find a GEVO of all engines at a cement plant, rather than working on the main line hauling long-distance freight trains, you know what I mean? I mean, it's not a fancy career for this locomotive, but at least it's serving its purpose as an industrial machine, right?
Okay. 2 more videos.
Good days start with homemade breakfast sandwiches. Technically, so can bad days. Come on, how can you have a bad day after eating bacon and eggs smothered in Land O'Lakes cheese? Eat it like you own it.
I know,
You probably know about it for the wrong reasons. is an annual race located in the greater Boston area, with this event being held on Patriots Day, which is the third Monday of April. This annual marathon has been a tradition since 1897 and has been the oldest annual marathon in the world. In 1995, on the 99th annual race, Conrail would collaborate with shoe brand Nike to make a locomotive advertisement for the event. The locomotive in question was number 1621, an EMD GP15-1 built in October 1979 as one of 100 built for the company, and being the second highest order of GP15s in North America. They produced 1500 horsepower, which was the same amount as the tried and true GP7s and GP9s, alongside having options for turbo and AC power if necessary. 1621 was quickly decorated for the event, receiving a last-minute livery of its Conrail blue, but with the Nike logos replacing the Conrail markings, with the text along the side saying, "Just do it!" Yeah, what he said. The lone Jeep was situated along the marathon route, being parked at a crossing in Framingham, Massachusetts on April 17, 1995. And as the marathon happened, it was parked right beside the MBTA station as the thousands of participants passed by, with the spring sun shining over, and that's all it did. No publicity run, nor any fancy commercials. It just sat there, staring to your soul as a brand partnership. What a wasted opportunity. After the marathon, 1621 was reverted back to its Conrail identity and continued serving for the company until the Conrail split in 1999, with the 1621 falling to the hands of Norfolk Southern. Its service life would be rather short though, as by 2007, the GP15s were retired from Norfolk Southern, with many being sold off to Larry's Truck and Electric, 1408 included. It would receive a repaint into a rather dull red livery, and as of 2013, it's now rotting away in Ohio, where its return to service is uncertain. But once was a neat collaboration with a popular shoe brand, only fell into irrelevancy after its sponsorship ended. Talk about 15 minutes of fame. But I guess to close off the video, take into account Shia LaBeouf's, whoa.
So just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it!
I've talked about one of GE's unusual residents before on this channel, and today, we're returning back to Erie once again to cover one of its cobbled-together anomalies. Let's jump back to 1995. Norfolk Southern began taking delivery of its newest motive power in the form of the Dash 940C. These were a standard cab variant of the Dash 9 model made specifically for Norfolk Southern, as the company wasn't sold on the wide cab design just yet. 8808 was among one of these top hats to arrive, joining the roster in January 1995, and was seen hauling freight across the northeastern and midwestern United States well into the 21st century. However, by 2015, NS began sending its top hats into rebuilds to be converted to AC traction, with the major cosmetic alteration being the replacement of the standard cab in favor of a newer wide cab. 8808 would be sent over to Erie in July of 2016, where it was stripped, mutilated, and renumbered to 4006, now being designated as an AC44C6M. While the locomotive's core lives on in revenue service, the cab of 8808 would be reused by General Electric for a rather unusual kit bash, to say the least. This new battery switch
This is what it would be like. Like why
If we stop recording right now.
oh my god, Adrian, why?
Because it's already nighttime.
This is Norfolk Southern. We're gonna have to take it to
in favor of a new wide cab. 8808 will be sent over to Erie.
Yeah, we're gonna have to take you. No, please, I don't want to be going.
No, I think we're going to bed at 9 right now. I think we're going to bed right now. So we're going to bed.
Oh my god, okay.
Used by General Electric for the United States well into the 21st century. and rebuild being the replacement of the standard cab in favor of a newer wide cab. 8808 would be sent over to Erie in July 2016, where it was stripped, mutilated, and renumbered to 4006, now being designated as an AC44C6M. While the locomotive's core lives on in revenue service, the cab of 8808 would be reused by General Electric for a rather unusual kit bash, to say the least.
Why? Why did they make me as this? Someone.
This new battery switcher was made up of 8808's old cab out the nose, an unpainted frame riding on just a single high-end truck, being powered with a battery, I think, and couplers of adjustable heights for different locomotives due to the various export locomotives which more or less ran on different loading gauges. Today, this unusual switcher still resides at GE, now Wabtec's Erie plant, likely used for maneuvering locomotives around the facilities. Or at least my speculation, since finding information and photos on this locomotive is extremely limited due to its location on private property, with hardly any photographs online.
It's at 100.
Drone shot being the only one I was able to, well, find. So what you've mostly been seeing is a recreation of this oddity. So, yeah, technically, a small fragment of them lives on through closed doors.
Okay.
Allergies got you
I'm
trying
almost
every trick.
finished.
Zyrtec works fast and lasts 24 hours, so you can Z's the day.
Ready to work on motorcycles, personal watercraft, or off-road machines?
Are we recording right now?
Okay.
With
One last
bogies
one.
that allowed each axle to adapt to various angles, radial trucks were locomotive bogies that allowed each axle to adapt to various angles of curved tracks, while reducing wear on the rails and flanges, while at the same time improving the ride quality. Making their production debuts on the ST-70s in 1993, one unlikely locomotive helped in the development of these revolutionary bogies. The ST-60s debuted in 1984 as an improvement to the ill-fated ST-50s, with new 16-cylinder engines and new electrical equipment to boot. 4 demonstrators were built around mid-1984. Of these was number 3, which was built around July, and much like the other demo units, toured across the United States on various railroads to get them interested in potentially buying their own. And following these tests, 3 of the demonstrators were sold to Conrail, but number 3 stayed behind on the demonstrator fleet as EMD began using it as a testbed for its radial truck project. By 1987, number 3 was sent over to the Transportation Technology Center in Pueblo, Colorado for further testing. It was reportedly fitted with what's called an adapter plate, which made it easier to remove the bogie without interfering with the locomotive's center bearings. I couldn't find any photos of this specific truck in particular, and all this information is coming from a Trains forum post by someone who actually designed the HECR trucks, so make of that what you will. In 1990, number 3 was fitted with 2 prototype HTCR trucks, and continued testing around Pueblo, Colorado until late October, later moving out to Reno for further testing, and the test runs concluding around December of 1990. And following its evaluation, number 3 was leased out to Burlington Northern and later BNSF well into the 2000s, working primarily on unit coal trains across the BNSF system. It was later renumbered to 9041 to match the rest of the Oakway fleet, and was later leased out to Norfolk Southern into the 2010s. Around that time, though, the remaining Oakway ST-60s were sold off to Canadian National, but 9041 wasn't among them, as the engine wounded up into the hands of GMTX, gaining the new number 9000 and a fresh coat of GMTX paint. It would spend the rest of the 2010s working on short lines such as the Providence and Western, the New England Central, Vermont Terminal, and finally settling in on the New York Susquehanna, where it remains today. Number 3's fitting with these radial trucks helped EMD develop these locomotive trucks for mass production, as thousands of modern EMDs still wear these trucks to this day. All thanks to an unlikely test subject.
Well, thank you all for watching this video. See you next time. Bye. Also, guys, subscribe.